They mocked her silence and mistook patience for weakness, until the truth she quietly collected tore down everyone who protected the bullies. Morning always arrived quietly at Amazing Girls College. Before the gates filled with laughter, before footsteps echoed through the hallways, Mallerie was already there. She walked in with measured steps, her bag held close, her eyes lowered, not out of shame but habit. She preferred the quiet, or maybe, over time, the quiet had chosen her. In class, Mallerie took the same seat every day. Near the window, not too close, not too far. She opened her books carefully, straightened her pages, and listened. She never raised her hand unless she was asked. She never spoke unless it was necessary. Her uniform was always clean, her work always neat, her presence always small. To most students, she was just another face in the room. To teachers, she was no trouble at all. And in that place, being no trouble meant being unseen. While other girls laughed loudly and demanded attention, Mallerie faded into the background. Teachers praised confident voices and bold answers, but they rarely noticed the girl who sat still and endured. Quiet pain looked like discipline. Silence looked like peace. But it wasn't. During breaks, Mallerie sat alone, sometimes under the stairs, sometimes at the edge of the field. She watched groups form and reform, friendships grow louder, smiles become sharper. She held her lunch untouched, listening to laughter that felt far away, as if it belonged to another world. She wanted to speak. She wanted to belong. But experience had taught her something early. Speaking up only made things worse. If I stay quiet, maybe they'll leave me alone. No one noticed how her shoulders stiffened when footsteps passed too close. No one noticed how she flinched at sudden laughter. And no one asked why a girl her age had learned to take up so little space. Is silence really peace? Or is it just pain no one wants to hear? At Amazing Girls College, silence was convenient. Kept classrooms calm. Kept reputations clean. Kept uncomfortable truths hidden. And so Mallerie's quietness was rewarded with neglect. She became easy to overlook, easy to forget, easy to ignore. And that was how it began. Because when people stop seeing you as a person, they start seeing you as nothing at all. Mallerie did not know yet that her invisibility was dangerous. Not for her, but for everyone who underestimated it. For now, she simply opened her book, kept her head down, and waited for the day to pass. The world moved loudly around her, never realizing that the quiet girl they ignored was already learning how everything worked. It did not start with cruelty. It started with laughter that lingered a little too long, with whispers that followed Mallerie down the hallway and stopped just behind her ears. At first, she told herself it was nothing, just jokes, just noise. But silence has a way of inviting the wrong kind of attention. A small group of girls noticed her stillness. They noticed how she never reacted, how her eyes dropped instead of meeting theirs, how she kept walking even when someone brushed past her shoulder a little too hard. To them, her quiet was not dignity. It was opportunity. One day, as Mallerie passed them, one of the girls laughed and said her name out loud, slowly, mockingly. The others joined in. Mallerie felt the heat rise in her face, but she kept moving. No words, no protest, just silence. That silence became permission. Soon the accidents began. A light push in the hallway, followed by fake apologies and smiling faces. A chair kicked from behind just as she sat down. When her pen disappeared, someone shrugged and said she must have lost it. When her notes went missing, fingers pointed at her first. Mallerie never shouted. She never cried in front of them. She only lowered her head and endured. If I don't react, they'll get bored, she told herself. But they didn't. They learned her habits. They learned when she arrived, where she sat, how far they could go. And each time nothing happened, they went a little further. Laughter grew sharper. Smiles grew crueler. Mallerie was no longer a classmate to them. She was entertainment. What hurts more than being pushed is being laughed at for surviving it. In class, the bullying became quieter but more dangerous. A torn page slipped into the trash. Homework vanished just before submission. When the teacher asked questions, the girls turned innocent eyes toward Mallerie, letting the blame fall on her like a shadow. The room never went silent for her. It went indifferent. No teacher stepped in. No student spoke up. And every time nothing happened, the bullies grew bolder. Silence, they believed, meant agreement. It meant weakness. It meant safety for them. Did anyone ever stop to wonder why she never fought back? During breaks, Mallerie sat alone, feeling eyes on her back. Laughter followed her like a bruise you couldn't see but always felt. She learned to eat quickly, to walk carefully, to disappear as much as possible. Inside, fear settled deep. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant. A quiet fear that told her to stay small, to stay invisible, to survive the day. And so the bullying continued, not because it was allowed, but because it was ignored. Because in a place where no one says anything, cruelty learns it can live freely. Amazing Girls College was proud of its reputation. The walls were clean. The rules were written clearly. Teachers spoke often about discipline, respect, and values. On the surface, everything looked controlled and orderly. But beneath that calm surface, something was being quietly ignored. When Mallory's pen went missing, the teacher sighed and told her to be more careful. When her homework was torn and thrown away, the explanation was simple: carelessness. Each time something went wrong, eyes turned toward the quiet girl, not because there was proof, but because she was easy to blame. She tried to speak once. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the noise of the classroom. She explained what had happened, choosing her words carefully. The louder girls shook their heads, wearing innocent expressions. They laughed lightly, as if the idea itself was ridiculous. The teacher believed them. After all, confident voices sounded truthful. Silence sounded uncertain. Reports were written and quietly forgotten. Complaints were made and never answered. What should have been investigated simply disappeared, leaving Mallerie alone with her confusion and shame. Each ignored report taught her a painful lesson. In this school, being calm meant being doubted. Maybe if I talk less, they'll stop noticing me. Teachers called her well-behaved. They praised her for never causing trouble. They never realized that her obedience was built on fear, not respect. Quiet students made classrooms easier to manage, and that convenience came at a cost no one wanted to acknowledge. Why is it that the loudest voices are always believed first? When something went wrong, blame shifted smoothly, away from those who laughed too freely, and onto the girl who could barely defend herself. The system worked efficiently, just not fairly. Protected confidence, not truth. Power, not pain. Mallerie began to understand that this was not just about a few cruel students. It was about adults who preferred peace over justice. About a system that mistook silence for safety and ignored the harm growing inside it. Every ignored complaint made the bullies stronger. Every dismissive look told them they were untouchable. And every time Mallerie walked back to her seat without being heard, something inside her grew heavier. She stopped going to teachers. Not because the bullying stopped, but because hope did. The school continued as usual.
Bells rang.
Lessons were taught. Smiles were forced. And in the middle of it all, a quiet girl learned that the place meant to protect her was choosing not to see her at all. Amazing Girls College did not shout its failure. It whispered it in every ignored report and every shifted blame. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. The classroom was filled with the low sound of pages turning and pens moving across paper. Group work had been assigned, and students leaned toward one another, whispering answers, trading smiles. Mallerie sat quietly at her desk, her work finished, her hands folded neatly in front of her. That was when the accusation came. One of the girls stood up and spoke loudly, her voice confident and clear. She said Mallerie had copied answers. Another nodded in agreement. A third added details that sounded convincing enough to believe. The room shifted. Heads turned. Eyes landed on Mallerie all at once. She looked up, startled. The teacher's expression hardened. Without asking questions, without checking the work, she called Mallerie to the front of the class. Every step felt heavy. The floor seemed too far away. The air felt tight in her chest. Mallerie tried to explain. Her voice came out small, trembling, almost apologetic. though she had done nothing wrong. Words stumbled over one another as she spoke. Behind her, soft laughter spread. Someone whispered her name like a joke. The teacher cut her off. In front of everyone, Mallerie was scolded. Her honesty was doubted. Her character questioned. She was told to stand there and listen as if shame itself were a lesson. The classroom felt suddenly too bright, too loud, too close. What hurts more than being accused is being unheard. Her face burned. Her eyes filled, but she refused to cry. Crying would only make it worse. She stood still, holding herself together while the room watched her fall apart in silence. They've already decided who I am. When she was finally told to sit down, no one looked at her kindly. Some looked amused. Others looked away. Not one person spoke for her. Later, in the bathroom, Mallerie locked herself into a stall. The sound of laughter echoed from outside, distant but sharp. Tears came then, quietly, carefully. She washed her face again and again, trying to erase the feeling of being exposed. But something had changed. It wasn't anger that settled inside her. It wasn't rage or revenge. It was clarity. She understood, finally, that explaining herself in a place like this was useless. Truth did not win here. Confidence did. Noise did. And silence, her silence, was being used against her. Standing in front of the mirror, she looked at her reflection. Her eyes were tired, but they were open. She made a decision without speaking it aloud. She would stop trying to convince people who never wanted to believe her. If they wanted silence, she would give it to them, but not the kind that breaks. The kind that watches. The kind that remembers. The classroom incident did not end her. It sharpened her. After the humiliation in class, Mallerie did not change in the way everyone expected. She did not cry loudly. She did not argue. She did not suddenly become brave in the ways people recognize. Instead, she grew quieter, so quietly that even the bullies believed they had finally won. But this silence was different. Mallerie stopped wasting her strength on explaining herself. She began to use it to observe. In the classroom, she watched faces more than books. In the hallways, she listened more than she spoke. She noticed who laughed first, who followed, and who stayed silent out of fear. She noticed patterns. Certain girls spoke to teachers without hesitation. They broke rules and smiled while doing it. When their names were mentioned, teachers softened their voices. When complaints involved them, the conversations ended quickly. Others were punished for far less. Mallerie began to see the invisible lines of power running through the school. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about who was protected and who was replaceable. She watched how some students could push, threaten, and mock without consequences. She watched how blame always slid toward the same quiet shoulders. And she began to understand something painful but important. Bullying survived not because it was hidden, but because it was allowed. They're not brave. They're protected. That realization settled deep inside her, heavy but steady. During lessons, she listened to more than words. She paid attention to tone, pauses, and the way teachers avoided certain topics. During breaks, she noticed conversations that stopped suddenly when adults passed by. Laughter that sounded confident, but carried a trace of fear beneath it. How many people knew the truth and chose not to see it? The bullies grew bolder, convinced that Mallerie had accepted her place. They crossed boundaries more freely now, whispering threats disguised as jokes. To them, her silence looked like surrender. They didn't know it had become her strategy. Mallerie started remembering everything. Names, dates, places, who stood where, who said what. She didn't write it down, not yet. She carried it carefully in her mind, knowing that memory alone could be dangerous, but also powerful. For the first time, she was not reacting. She was preparing. Fear still lived inside her, but it no longer controlled her. It sharpened her attention. Every insult became information. Every ignored complaint became proof of how the system worked. The school looked the same on the outside.
Bells rang.
Lessons continued. Smiles stayed in place. But Mallerie could see through it now. She understood that silence did not have to mean weakness. Could mean patience. Could mean focus. It could mean waiting for the right moment. when the truth would be strong enough to stand on its own. And while everyone else was busy underestimating her, Mallerie was learning exactly how they would fall. It happened when the school thought the day was already over. The classrooms were mostly empty, chairs pushed in, voices fading down the hallway. Mallerie stayed behind to finish copying notes she had missed. The quiet felt familiar, almost comforting. She packed her bag slowly, careful not to make noise. That was when she heard voices outside the door. Two girls were standing close by, laughing freely, too freely. They didn't know Mallerie was still inside. When she heard her own name spoken casually, her hands froze. The girls talked openly, without fear. They joked about how teachers never questioned them. They laughed about complaints that disappeared. One of them mentioned parents, connections, and how nothing ever sticks. Mallerie stood perfectly still, her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid it could be heard through the door. So this is why no one listens. Every word confirmed what she had quietly suspected for months. It wasn't that the truth was weak. It was that power was protecting lies. Reporting bullying had never failed because she was wrong. It failed because the system was already decided. How long had this been happening? Later that evening, in the school library, Mallerie noticed a notebook lying alone on a table. First, she planned to return it. She reached for it, hesitated, then opened it, just enough to see the first page. Names, dates, short, careful notes written in a familiar handwriting. Her breath caught. The entries weren't random. They described incidents, arguments, threats, complaints that went nowhere. Some names appeared again and again. Names she recognized immediately. Even more disturbing were the other names. Adults, staff, people meant to protect students. Mallerie closed the notebook quickly, her hands trembling. This isn't just in my head. Fear rushed in, sharp and sudden. What if someone saw her? What if she was blamed again? But alongside the fear came something new, something solid. Proof. She slipped the notebook into her bag, her movements slow and deliberate. The weight of it felt heavier than paper, like she was carrying a truth that had been buried for too long. At home that night, behind a locked door, Mallerie opened the notebook again. She read every page carefully. Each line tightened her chest. Dates matched her memories. Names matched her pain. Patterns became undeniable. The bullies hadn't been fearless, they had been protected. For the first time, Mallerie wasn't guessing. She wasn't imagining things. She wasn't doubting herself. The truth was written clearly in ink, and it changed everything. The school hallways felt different the next day. Louder, tighter. Every laugh sounded forced. Every smile felt fragile. Mallerie carried the secret quietly, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. She did not smile. She did not rush. She waited, because now silence wasn't empty anymore. It was evidence waiting for the right moment to speak. It did not begin with an announcement. There was no confrontation, no raised voice, no dramatic scene in the hallway. The truth entered the school quietly. One phone buzzed during morning break, then another. A screen tilted toward a friend. A sharp inhale. A hand covering a mouth. The video moved the way secrets always do. Softly, carefully, almost respectfully. In the footage, voices were clear. Faces were unmistakable. Laughter sounded cruel when replayed without power behind it. Words once spoken freely now echoed with consequences. There was no editing, no added drama. Just truth standing on its own. By lunchtime, the atmosphere had changed. The girls who once walked with loud confidence now moved cautiously, their smiles stiff, their eyes darting around the room. The laughter that once filled the cafeteria had thinned into whispers. Conversations stopped the moment someone approached. Fear had replaced ease. Teachers noticed it first as a shift they couldn't name. Students noticed it as a heaviness in the air. The same hallways that once swallowed Mallerie's silence now carried murmurs of disbelief. Is it real? Did you see it? How long has this been happening? Mallerie walked through the noise without reacting. She did not look at her phone. She did not seek eye contact. She sat at her desk like she always had, quiet, composed, almost invisible. But something had changed. People looked at her differently now. Some with guilt. Some with curiosity. Some with respect they had never offered before. I don't need to speak anymore. The truth is speaking for me. One of the bullies left class early, her face pale. Another snapped at a friend, her voice shaking. The confidence they wore so easily before cracked under the weight of being seen. Was this what accountability felt like? The video reached places it was never meant to reach. Screenshots followed. Audio clips resurfaced. Patterns connected themselves without Mallerie lifting a finger. The power that once protected them began to retreat, quietly, the way it had arrived. No one laughed at Mallerie that day. No one whispered when she passed. For the first time, silence belonged to someone else. She sat by the window during last period, sunlight resting softly on her desk. Outside, the school looked the same, walls unchanged, doors still heavy. But inside, everything had shifted. Truth had rearranged the balance without asking permission. Mallerie didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply breathed, because justice didn't need her voice anymore. It had found its own. They did not accept the truth quietly. When the whispers turned into meetings, and the meetings turned into questions, the bullies did what they had always done best. They tried to change the story. Tears appeared suddenly. Voices trembled on command. They spoke of misunderstandings, of jokes taken too seriously, of a quiet girl who was too sensitive. And once again they pointed at Mallerie. They said she had edited the video, that she wanted attention, that she was angry because she never fit in. The same accusations, recycled and polished, thrown into the air with the hope they would stick. For a moment, the room held its breath. Teachers exchanged glances. Administrators shuffled papers. The old pattern tried to return, blame the quiet one, protect the confident ones. It almost worked. Almost. Then a chair moved. A girl from the back stood up, hands shaking but voice steady. She spoke about what she had seen in the restroom, the hallway, the group chats no teacher ever entered. Her words landed heavily, one by one. Another student followed. Then another. Stories overlapped. Dates matched. Screenshots appeared. Voices joined together, not loud, but firm. What had once been Mallerie's lonely truth became a shared reality. How long can a lie survive when everyone finally tells the same truth? The bullies' faces changed as control slipped away. Their explanations tangled. Their confidence cracked. Each new voice pulled another brick from the wall they had built around themselves. Mallerie sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. This time I am not alone. No one asked her to defend herself. No one demanded proof from her anymore. The room no longer needed her pain to be convincing. It had already seen enough. The story they tried to rewrite collapsed under its own weight. Excuses sounded hollow. Tears felt forced. Power drained from the words that once ruled the school. The same students who had laughed the loudest now avoided eye contact, shrinking beneath the attention they once craved. And in that moment something rare happened. The system listened. Not because it suddenly became kind, but because it could no longer pretend not to hear. When the meeting ended, the hallway felt different. Students looked at Mallerie not with pity, but with understanding. Some nodded. Some whispered apologies. Some simply stepped aside to let her pass. She walked forward calmly, not seeking revenge, not chasing validation. She had already won something greater. Her truth had survived every attempt to erase it. The announcement was short. No names spoken aloud. No dramatic speeches. Just a quiet notice posted on the board outside the administration office. A few lines. Final decisions made. Students removed. Policies updated. Justice arrived without applause. By the next morning, certain desks were empty. Laughter that once filled the corridors did not return. Teachers spoke more carefully now, their eyes lingering longer, their voices softer. Posters about safety and reporting appeared on walls that had once ignored pain. The school admitted its failure, not with emotion, but with procedure. Meetings were held. New systems were introduced. Anonymous reporting. Clear consequences. Promises written in formal language. It was not perfect, but it was something. Mallerie watched it all from a distance. She did not smile when she heard the news. She did not feel victory when she passed the empty lockers. There was no thrill in knowing the girls who hurt her were gone. There was only a deep, quiet release, like a breath she had been holding for too long. Was this what freedom felt like? She sat alone in the library that afternoon, sunlight falling gently across the table. For the first time, silence felt different. It was no longer heavy. It no longer pressed against her chest. It belonged to her. I don't need them to suffer. I just need to be safe. Some students expected her to celebrate. They waited for a smile, a reaction, a moment of triumph. But Mallerie offered none. She carried no anger now, no desire to look back. Justice had not healed everything. The memories still lived inside her. The fear did not disappear overnight. But the weight, the constant watchfulness, the feeling of being hunted, that was gone. And that was enough. A teacher passed her in the hallway and nodded, eyes filled with something close to regret. Another stopped to ask how she was doing. Really doing. Small gestures. Late gestures. But real. Mallerie walked through the school with steady steps. Not invisible anymore. Not loud either. Just present. The building hadn't changed, but she had. She no longer shrank when voices rose behind her. She no longer avoided mirrors or doorways. She no longer questioned whether her pain mattered. Justice didn't give her a crown. It gave her peace. And peace was more powerful than any celebration. The halls of Amazing Girls College felt different now. Not because the walls had changed or the rules had grown stricter, but because the quiet had shifted. Silence no longer meant fear. Silence no longer meant weakness. Students walked more freely, voices no longer trembling under invisible pressure. Laughter returned. But this time, it felt lighter, safer, genuine. Mallerie walked through the same corridors she had once feared, and nothing pressed down on her chest. She did not seek attention, did not crave recognition, and did not demand apologies. She simply moved with calm assurance, her presence a quiet reminder that strength does not always shout. Was this what being safe felt like? She noticed younger students watching her, their eyes wide but curious. One of them whispered softly, "Thank you," and Mallerie gave the smallest of smiles in return. It wasn't pride. It wasn't victory. It was acknowledgement. The understanding that her patience, her silence, had mattered more than any words could. Teachers, too, had changed. They listened more carefully now. They responded instead of dismissing. They saw the power in paying attention, and they learned that ignoring quiet suffering allowed cruelty to grow. The bullies were gone, but their absence left a lesson that could not be erased. Other students began to speak up sooner, to protect each other, to record, to notice what once went unseen. Fear no longer ruled, but respect and understanding began to replace it. Mallerie's strength had not come from fighting. It had come from patience, from watching, from knowing when to act and when to wait. She had learned that silence could be a shield, a tool, a way to prepare the world to hear the truth when it was ready to be spoken. They all thought my silence was empty. They didn't know it was building something stronger. The school had changed subtly but undeniably. Meetings now reviewed complaints with care. Reports that would have vanished were now tracked. Conversations in hallways no longer carried the weight of unchecked cruelty. And in the midst of all this, Mallerie continued her studies quietly, unnoticed by some, respected by others, and feared by no one. For her, the world was no longer a battlefield. It was a space where she could exist without bending to the expectations of others, where she could simply be, and in that quiet being, she had already taught the school a lesson it would not forget. Silence, she had discovered, could be more powerful than words. Patience could be more transformative than anger. And waiting for the right moment could change more than rushing ever could. As she looked at the younger students beginning to navigate the halls with courage, she understood the lasting truth. Strength is not always loud, and justice does not always need an audience.